Hello friends. Today's discussion is about Jesus and his soulmate, his mother Mary. They are two avatars from the same soul. They are true soulmates. They are two avatars that also incarnated on earth from higher density spheres such as 6th, 7th, 8th. So there was a plan enacted at the paradise son and daughter level, which I've mentioned in other videos. This is beyond 8th density. At the paradise level, a new blueprint was designed that was incorruptible by any of the lower frequencies or densities. This event that Jesus did with his soulmate Mary was not just earth-centric. It actually was purposely put together for all the dimensions involved in the universal reality that we live in. So this was a multi-dimensional event that occurred, and there were beings in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th dimensions that were also involved in this event. So when this blueprint was created, and I mentioned earlier that the blueprints are what create physical bodies, and the blueprint is what houses consciousness. So when this blueprint was created at the paradise level, the being that we know as Jesus came down from that higher level and lowered his frequency down to our dimension and seated Mary. And so I want to be clear on this. Jesus fathered himself. So this is an idea that would not have been able to be understood in those days, but it is a ability of the higher realms, the much higher realms, to do. So they brought down a seed packet and impregnated Mary. And then Mary carried this consciousness, which was now forming as what we know as Jesus. And this consciousness that originally brought the seed packet down is the same consciousness, but he's not known as Jesus in those higher realms, but he lowered his frequency down to the 6th, 7th realm in order to incarnate into Mary. So they were both hovering at about the same frequency at birth. We're talking above the 4th and 5th level. These were higher density beings. Mary was not an ignorant peasant of a tribal mentality. She was a highly evolved being. She had a multi-dimensional consciousness, and she could travel in the higher realms just like Jesus. Mary was also very young when this occurred, and Joseph, who was much older with a family already, widowed, was given specific instructions to be her guardian, nothing else. But because she was pregnant, this required a marriage. So while Jesus was growing up, there was a lot of time spent in other realms, in the 4th realms, the 5th realms, the higher dimensional realms, because Jesus had a consciousness that could travel into other bodies. Mary did also. Mary was telepathic. Jesus and Mary communicated quite easily telepathically. They even traveled together in some of these higher densities and worked among the other extraterrestrials and life forms that were very much involved in this entire event. This entire event had the focus of many realms of consciousness, and so Jesus spent a lot of time in those other realms of consciousness, also paving the way for this new blueprint, which was coming in. So these higher realms, some specific species or planetary consciousnesses were involved in this. Not all of them, but those that were in line with the new blueprint and who could hold the new blueprint and carry it through the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th densities, they were involved in this also. There was a huge amount of consciousness involved in this event. So I'm going to move forward to the crucifixion, because this is where I actually witnessed this. My soul took me to the cross that I could witness and be educated on these processes I'm telling you about now. And so I'm going to tell you this story. When the crucifixion happened, Jesus went up on the cross, Jesus left that body because he is a multidimensional being. He could travel out of body quite easily. He did not sit on the cross in agony and suffering and have little chats with people around the cross. That never happened. In fact, the Romans put up a perimeter around the area where Jesus was, and there were spectators, probably followers and disciples, but they were on the outskirts of this perimeter. There was no conversations going on between Jesus and the other people on the crosses that were a little bit away. Jesus never told his beloved mother that he loved very much, "Woman, here is your son," as he spoke to what was then termed the disciple whom Jesus loved, John. He never called his mother woman. This is a masculine interpretation and a rewrite of history from a male's perspective, where women had very little rights at all and who were not even allowed to testify as an eyewitness to an event that happened right in front of them because they were considered so unreliable. I can assure you Jesus never spoke to Mary that way, and that also never occurred. There was no conversations going on the cross. Jesus left. He left that body. So now what I'm trying to explain that happened next is that, let me also make a statement about Mary. When this crucifixion happened, 2 higher beings from the 6th and 7th, I'm going to call this a realm. 6th, 7th, and 8th is a realm, just like 3rd, 4th, and 5th is a realm. 2 beings from this higher realm showed up beside Mary as guards and escorted her away from the entire area during the crucifixion because her life was in jeopardy. So she was completely removed from this scene. When Jesus had left his body during the crucifixion, he was in the other realms going through a process there as well to prepare the way for this new blueprint. But when this occurred, there was a great force of energy occurring on Earth at that time. Spaceships were showing up. All kinds of phenomena was happening. Portals were opening up. And there are some stories about how the dead were rising and walking around. Well, what they were seeing were interdimensional beings popping through portals, and they were around the cross. And Mary could see all of this. She was quite aware of these other realms. She could see these kind of things. And she needed to be removed because her DNA, which was a faulty belief system, but her egg, her ovary, her DNA was prized, and so she was removed from the area. So what was allowed was sort of an unleashing of the dark at that time, and I saw them roaming around the cross. And I want to tell you the reason why Jesus had the spear in his side, because the typical time at that point was to, break the knees. They did this because they collected Jesus's blood. This was an event that was timed and planned, that the spear in a container would house his blood, because his blood was considered magical. His blood was considered to have a lot of power, and the dark wanted it. That blood was divided among several magicians in the Roman courts and also some Jewish magicians. It was divided among the lower ETs who knew better, but they wanted the blood anyway. But also who wanted this blood were these interdimensional beings, which I mentioned in the previous video, that are here on earth to reap destruction and to keep humanity trapped in addictions and imprisonment of their consciousness and imprisonment of their blueprint. They were all over that area. Some of them were very grotesque beings. They were even crawling up on the cross. I'm telling you this as an eyewitness. These were interdimensional beings. So not people, not the Roman soldiers or normal people could see them, but multidimensional beings, possibly some of the disciples that were there, maybe John if he was there, could see this. They were crawling on the body of Jesus, licking the blood. There was a massive scramble to get his blood. And the ETs that were negative ETs, I'll just say warring ETs, they also were scrambling for the DNA, which they could have gotten at any time because you can get it from skin cells, but they were wanting this more potent variety. This was just a horrendous event from a very low consciousness level, but from a higher density level, it was the entire implosion of this old blueprint and all the dark that was associated with the corruption of this old blueprint just sort of gathered in one place at the cross and imploded. And this is why there was such a dark wave that came through at the death of Jesus down into the pits of the lowest frequencies possible. This was all the death of the old program. So it was not a very pleasant thing to witness. But the news I want to explain to you also, or to bring to you, is that Jesus did not suffer. He left that body to die as was appropriate, and he moved up into the higher densities during this time period. So when the body, the Romans were very interested in the body, the Jews were very interested in the body, everybody wanted access to that. It was put in the tomb. It was guarded because people, ETs had been negotiating with some of the people, some of the beings, some of the Romans and Jews on the planet to take the body. So there was this desire to take the body one way or another because of all the profound abilities that he had. But that was not happening either because an entire guardian group of higher density beings came into that area and guarded that body. So now I want to say that normally when a body dies in a situation like this from a high density being, they have great powers. They can dissolve that body and just move on. But because he was implementing a divine blueprint, a new blueprint, he had to resurrect that specific body. Because that body's DNA, which was Mary's DNA, and Jesus from the higher frequencies DNA, that body had to be anchored in this third dimension. And from that position, when that body was raised and purified and then sanctified with the new divine blueprint, and a special seal was placed on this blueprint from the paradise beings, the paradise sons and daughters that could in no way corrupt this blueprint. This blueprint had to be anchored in our density. And then from there, when Jesus appeared, and he did appear so people could validate that there was a new blueprint, that there was a resurrection. This did occur. His main focus, though, was not on his death and not for remissions of, not his blood had nothing to do with anything except the dark wanted the blood. That's the only thing they could vampire, because they had no access to the divine program, to the divine blueprint. So blood has always been a lower life form attempt at power and immortality. It doesn't work, friends. So that whole thing about the blood with Jesus is false. Jesus's whole mission was to bring forth a divine blueprint and a new lineage. And when he resurrected and then moved through ascension into these other frequencies, Mary also was removed from this realm, this plane, you could say. She ascended. They created, when they started moving up the dimension, the frequencies or densities, they were creating a new family lineage. And this family lineage was Jesus, his mother, and the father's seed that was planted into Mary, which was the paradise level consciousness of Jesus. So we had a Trinity create a new divine lineage, a father, a mother, and a son. And this lineage is what we now have access to. And so one of the things that occurred, I have my pearls on today because this is how I witnessed it. When I was in, when Jesus left the earth plane, he moved up these densities, and I'm using a strand of pearls because this is what I saw. He started at our density and he moved there from 4th, and then to 5th, and then to 6th, the 7th to 8th, and then beyond that is moving into the paradise sons and daughters. But in each of these densities, he created what was a very pearly essence dominion in these areas, these densities, these frequencies of civilizations and consciousness. He created his own dominion, his own kingdom in these different densities of light all the way up. And it created a strand of pearls so that the avatars who chose to follow in Jesus's footsteps could be initiated into this lineage via the sacred fire and what we now is also termed the Holy Spirit, but it is a fire baptism. It is not a baptism in your church with water. That's a member of a community. To join this lineage and to take on this divine blueprint, you must have a baptism by fire. Your whole consciousness has to be reorganized. It has to be purified. And this is one of the reasons I also want to say Jesus was never married. Jesus never had sex. Because high density beings in 6th, 7th, and 8th absolutely have no desire for an animal lusting act of sex. It can even be quite repulsive, really. But it is not even in their consciousness to do that. It's not even in their consciousness. So, granted, there are higher density beings here that may have had sex, but it's because they allowed their consciousness to be compromised. When you understand the higher realms, which I explained in another video about the densities and the difference between them, you'll understand that that could never have happened. It's very similar, if I will tell real quickly the story of Saint Francis and Saint Clare. Francis, who became, whose total consciousness was reorganized, and he was baptized by fire with the appearance of Jesus. And his whole countenance was changed. He was nowhere near even contemplating sex. And this is what happened to Saint Clare, his first disciple, Saint Clare. And the two of them loved each other greatly and immensely, but they were pure, and they did not copulate and have sex. So just like St. Francis and St. Clare didn't, Jesus and any other idea of Magdalene or Mary Magdalene, this did not happen. So moving on. So the next thing I wanted to say about these pearls is that a few years ago I went to France, and I spent a few days in Paris, and then I met with some friends in southern France, and we went through that region of the Cathars, and we were on our way to Lourdes. And we were staying at a castle, and the last night we were at the castle, this group I was with had a big dinner party. And Spirit told me not to attend the dinner party, but to stay in my room, to fast, to pray, and to meditate. And so that night, this was the night before I went to Lourdes, where the Virgin Mary, the Immaculate Conception, Mother Mary visited in that region with the young girl. So that night, I had an out-of-body experience where I've talked about how I can travel in other dimensions using other bodies. These are in other videos that I have. But that particular night, I was traveling through the lineage of Jesus. And I was going through the fourth lineage, the fourth density, the fifth density, the sixth density. I was moving up these densities. And as I would move up the density, I would enter into this pocket of consciousness, or domain is what I like to say, that was totally the domain of this new divine blueprint, the domain of Jesus or the Christ, or the divine blueprint or the family lineage. And every time you would go into this density through this strand of pearls, now you can enter those densities in many other ways, but I'm talking about through the lineage of Jesus. Every time you would go into this new density, there were guards, there were gatekeepers. And I would pop into this density, and the gatekeepers would be there standing inside. I would call this like an entryway. Just like if you walked through a portal and you were standing in a large sort of antechamber or hall area before you actually went into the palace or went into the house. It was an entryway, and you had to go into this entryway, and the beings that were there, the guardians, you had to be acknowledged by these guardians, which they did acknowledge because you managed to go there. And when they had acknowledged it, you were then free to see if you could go up to the next level. So during the night, I was going up through these levels with all these guardians around me, being acknowledged by them, giving me permission to continue on. And I went as far as 7th density. And when I got to the 7th density of this pearl essence domain, because it looked like a sphere and it was very pearl essence-y looking. And now this domain can expand and you can walk into it, and it's an entire kingdom of light beings there. Or even in the 4th and 5th density of physical humans, of golden cities of light, of perfected humans, of higher consciousness beings in the 4th and 5th. So this is a purified lineage through all of the densities that we are aware of. So when I got to the 7th, that is where I was stopped, and a dome that was on top of this little area opened up, and I heard Jesus speak to me, and he said, "I am Christ Jesus, and I see you." And I looked up through the dome, and I said the same words back, "I am Christ Jesus, and I see you." And when that happened, that entire 8th dimension, a chorus of angels' voices began to sing in this most amazing choir that my consciousness could actually hear it at the 7th density. There is music in that density. I could hear it. There was a song that broke out and all over, just filled the whole area with vibrations, and these angelic voices were singing, I am Christ Jesus and I see you. And I had this amazing union with Jesus at this level. And this, after this event, well, the very next day we left and we went to Lourdes. And I had a number of experiences there, but I'm not really going into that right now. It's not that important. But the thing that was very important to me was this was sort of a culmination of my life from the very first time I encountered Jesus in that vision as a child, which is in my video on my childhood experiences, where Jesus came to me after I had seen a vision of the horrendous things that were going on in all the dimensions that are lower dimensions, including our frequency. At the end of all this dark stuff, I was shown in that vision, which is in another video. I was 7 years old. The baby Jesus appeared to me because I was 7, so this is how I was interpreting it. And I have explained this vision before, but I was outside on the grass, and the great central sun, which is the center point of light for our universe, where the sacred fire comes through, where the paradise suns live. That great central sun fed through our physical sun and shot a ray into my heart when I was 7. And so what happened to me a couple of years ago in France was sort of another level of my understanding of this lineage. And so this is the thing that I'm wanting to offer humanity and offer all my Christian friends and all my other friends of any other belief systems you have. There is a divine lineage that the blueprint is already perfect, and the lineage is perfect. And so while we have many other ways to rise up into these other densities, there are extraterrestrials, which I mentioned in the previous video, who have technology that can raise your frequency of this body till it dematerializes. They can also take your consciousness out of this body at death and put it into new bodies. I mention this over and over again. Consciousness traveling into or moving into other bodies is easily done if you understand the process. So moving your consciousness from a physical body to an astral body, a 4th density, a 5th density body is done easily. So there are ways to move out of one frequency into another frequency. But what has been occurring for a very long time is they've been tweaking and improving this DNA that had been corrupted. There are a lot of great divine beings of higher realms that have been tweaking this DNA to raise its frequency so that this body, as it is with this blueprint, could begin to raise up and interact more with 4th and 5th densities and become more of that civilization. And that is a typical way that a lot of humanity may rise up, because there's a lot of extraterrestrials that have family here, and there's a lot of them that are wanting to recruit people who are here to, when they pass over, to join their extraterrestrial groups and become a part of their consciousness. That's fine if that's what you want to do. It's not a negative, and I mean, there are negative ETs. You could wind up in places like that, but there are also just places you can go and enjoy the 4th and 5th density, which many people probably will. But there is another path that can take you out of the current blueprint into a new lineage. Because remember, I have other videos on that our behavior patterns and all the trouble that we seem to have, all the good and bad traits we have spring from our lineage. Because we do not reincarnate, we actually absorb the patterns of our lineage, and that's what we're dealing with, the good and the bad. So in order for us to have a way, and we take those patterns with us when we transfer up because they're in the blueprint, and when we move to another density, however those patterns are operating, they may be operating better in those densities, or if they're dropped in those densities, or you're still dealing with them in those densities. But with the lineage of Jesus, Mary, and the Father, seed from the Paradise Son, this lineage doesn't have any negativity on it. So when you are initiated into that lineage, you have more freedom to grow and expand your consciousness while on earth. You can become multidimensional easier. You can overcome obstacles. You will still have obstacles because you live in a world of contrast. So even though you may have, like St. Francis and Clare and St. Catherine of Siena, she had quite a number of challenges. She had visitations by dark forces in her bedroom, where they would perform all kinds of sexual perverse acts and taunt her. She went through a period of that for about 7 days. You have these challenges in the divine lineage, but you belong to Christ, and you will never ever be taken from this lineage. You cannot be, you might be interfered with, but it never stays. They cannot stay. I have witnessed this myself when I had interference. Jesus and Archangel Michael showed up, and they stood at a distance, and I had the telepathic communication that only a certain amount of this was going to be allowed for me to experience it, for my education, the interaction I had with dark forces, because it was part of my education. But I was never, ever in any jeopardy because I had followed the lineage of Christ since I was 7. So I want to tell you, this is a lineage I would highly recommend people to get into, to accept the fire of baptism into Christ's lineage, because no matter what you go through, you will always be victorious, and you will not be trapped in the astral planes, or what Catholics call purgatory. You will continue to grow up through the dimensions. And when you go through the pearls, the dimensions now, you will go through the pearls of Jesus's kingdoms. So there may be many kingdoms around in the 4th, 5th, 6th densities, but you will be in the kingdom of Jesus and Mary and the Paradise Son seeds. You will be in that kingdom all the way up. So you will be in those cities that we know, the cities of light, and you will be a light being that is capable of traveling and being of great service to the new divine blueprint and to your royal lineage and your beautiful family, of which many of us can and are now participating in. So I want to thank you for listening to this story, and I hope it has helped you a lot in understanding that there is a way out that is perfect and divine. But there are also many other ways. It is your choice. And so I want to say thank you. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below.